I'll see you guys in the dark.
What's up, stalkers of the night? One extremely rare no work, no class day when I was 19, I decided to go to a thrifting store. So I drove a few towns over to a store in a rural area where I'd always had decent luck. I'd decided to do a gallery wall in my bedroom and needed some cheap frames. I'm on the phone with my mom as I wander through the store. As I approach the frame aisle, I notice a 30 to 40-ish year old man standing alone, not in an aisle or looking at anything, just staring intently at me with a large, almost comical grin on his face. In the back of my mind, I recall how long it's been since I'd been in a thrift store, and wonder if he'd been staring the entire time, and I'd just not noticed yet. This prospect makes me feel weird, not wanting to take any chances. I look him in the face and said, "How's it going?" in a tone that hope implied that I'm not interested in any sort of weird bullshit today. He says nothing, almost like it didn't register with him. He keeps staring as I walked past, still with this huge, bizarre grin, whatever weirdo face that he has. I round up an armful of frames and begin laying them out on the floor. It's early afternoon on a weekday, and there are very few people in the store. I would be inconveniencing by spreading out. Sitting on the floor, still on the phone with my mom, I noticed a shadow over my work, and it dawns on me. The man not only hasn't moved on to keep shopping, he is standing right over me, not saying a single word. My mom picks this moment she wants to hang up with me. I try to stall her, but she's at work, so I let her go. I refused to be deterred by my mission, so I would just glance at him and keep arranging, but at this point, the warning bells were just reaching atomic levels in my brain, and I'm getting very jittery. I've never had this reaction before to a stranger acting strange, so something was definitely wrong. Still grinning and staring, he finally says, "You're pretty." "Thanks," I reply. "Where do you go to school?" I'm so nervous at this point, I actually blurt out the truth. There are 14,000 students at my university, I think to myself. He doesn't know who I am. He'd never find me if worse came to worse. He doesn't say another word and continues to stare, still grinning. My warning bells are becoming so loud I can't focus anymore, so I gather whatever I had on the floor and stand up to leave. Pretending to answer my phone, 19-year-old me wouldn't have dreamed of abandoning a conversation without a polite exit, even with a weirdo like him. And I straight up turned and left this guy. I make my way to the checkout and pray he wouldn't follow me to wait in line. He doesn't. He actually leaves. Oh, thank God, I thought. Why are some people so oblivious to the social awkwardness? More so, why was I so freaked out by this dude? It's not like he was the first creeper to ever creep me out. I stand on the longest line expecting my purchases, a little impressed that despite my distress, the haphazard grab I'd made yielded some decent finds. It's important to note that at this point there is a main entrance at the front of the building and a side door extension to the corner at the front door. The parking area is an L shape surrounding the exits. My car is parked smack dab in the corner, between the two exits, where my point in the store you cannot see my car. I let my gaze drift over to the side exit, where I see the man walking through the parking lot. There he goes. Fucking weirdo. As he walks, he is staring at me through the door. A minute later, I see him pass by the front entrance, which makes no sense because there is no exit to the road from that direction. You can't even get to the sidewalk from there. Maybe his car is parked over that way. He is still staring in at me. Another minute passes, and he reversed course to meander back past the front entrance, then past the side entrance again, the whole time still making eye contact with me as I'm waiting inside the store. It dawns on me that he is covering the exits, and possibly my car. But how would he know it's my car? Because you told him which school you go to, and your bright yellow school parking pass is hanging on your dashboard, plain as day. Being a cocky 19-year-old means you don't often realize you should be worried about some things, and yet I'm petrified when I realize this. I did something I've never done until then, and haven't had to since. Red-faced and flustered, I told the cashier because I didn't know what to do. She immediately offers a male employee to walk me to my car, and before me appears a high school friend whom I'd forgotten worked there. He grabs my bags and walks me to my car, where the man is standing by my driver's side door. My friend loads my things into the back seat, actually having to motion this guy out of the way, and we make a few words of small talk while the guy stands awkwardly in our conversation, trying to appear casual and unsure on how to proceed with whatever he was trying to do. He never says a single word. My friend closes my door behind me, gives the man a pointed enough look that he starts to wander away, and I speed towards the road. In my rearview mirror, I see the man walking out of the parking lot towards the road. He hasn't even arrived in a car, or with anyone for that matter. He wasn't waiting for anybody but me. When I left, his business was finished, or maybe even thwarted. I couldn't stop wondering if his plans would just continue, awkward small talk until I could exaggerate myself, or if he wanted to leave in my car, possibly by force. Having been admitted to the ER overnight, I was transferred to the second floor the following day for extended observation and treatment. I was lucky enough to get a 2-person room to myself, overlooking the graveled roof of the cafeteria and gray stone walls of the adjacent ward. Directly across the hall was also a patient with a 2-person room to herself, for reasons which will have been made abundantly clear. From what I gathered, she had been in the ward since the previous day, when I was sleeping in the ER. How do I know this girl? The girl is loud. She was talking to her friend on her cell phone about how she was pissed drunk coming back from a guy's house, pissed in her car, and crashed. My introduction to her was actually a nurse telling her, and I quote, "Do you realize we're being cold with you? We're not giving you a lecture. You're old enough to know better." She might have whiplash or lower back problems because she's been put on morphine and was in a wheelchair. But that's not even the start. She was constantly screaming at other people, other patients. "Close your fucking jacket. I don't want to see your butt," when they passed in front of her door. Mind you, she refused to wear the jacket, kept her single change of clothes and beanie hat. Also, "Don't look. Also, just close your damn door. Hell." She even went into the other patients' rooms and scolded them to properly tie their jacket. The patients were all elderly, so I never heard anything from them, of course. She curses at the nurses for confiscating her smokes because she tried to light up in her room. "I'll freaking sue you." Yeah, sure you will. When she got the evening meal, she yelled into the hallway because she didn't like apple juice and wanted something completely different. She never rang the nurse bell. She just moans loudly when someone passes by to try and get their attention. All the freaking time. She talked to me once, the first night I was in the ward. After lights out, I got up, hunched over, holding onto the drip pole. I shuffled to my room's bathroom. As I was opening the door, with difficulty I might add, being bent over, holding myself for support, dragging wires and such, she just states, "I can see your butt." She should have to be sitting on the edge of her bed and peering outside her room purposely to even spot me between curtains. My mind went to 2 places. The first and strongest instinct. 65% of me wanted to respond, "Then just don't look at me." Although the other 35% won out, thinking, "No, she's just crazy. Don't make yourself a target." De-escalate. So I am calmly stated I'm going to the bathroom. This worked. I don't think she expected any response because she said the calmest thing I'd heard all week from her. "Oh?" Next morning, all aboard the crazy train. I woke up to her yelling across the ward, to the room diagonally across the hall from her, to an older woman clipping their nails. "What's that freaking noise? Stop making that freaking noise. Ah, make it freaking stop." She had also vomited in the bathroom in the morning and had asked a nurse for a doctor to look at it. Well, the doctor wasn't there yet. A person in the other connected room had to go to the bathroom, so obviously they had flushed. Thus, Miss Bottle of Joy and Sunshine started yelling obscenities at her from her own room. You stupid biatch! Why did you flush it? Etc., etc. That got her nowhere. So instead, she decided to climb onto a wheelchair and run after a patient whose butt she saw, screaming, I will rip off their jacket! It's freaking disgusting! No idea what happened with that, but she did come back soon after. I don't think anybody was assaulted, though. That night, she called her actual boyfriend and started questioning him very loudly about red dots on her crotch. She swears it's not from her because she was tested before being with him. Throw pressure on her boyfriend. He admitted to diddling a girl when he was at the girl's place. Miss Sunshine turned up her psychotic yelling to 11, trying to get him to admit to more, then locked herself in the bathroom. That did not help the sound volume at all. Later at dinner, she yelled at the nurses saying that she did not want her side of the bathroom door locked. It wakes her up when other patients go to the bathroom. I told them 6 times not to go to the bathroom, but they just don't listen to me. She was back in bed, pressing the nurse call button, moaning loudly, calling into the hallway. She wants morphine now. The nurse comes in. You're not due for morphine for another 27 minutes. Little Miss Sunshine. Before it was 2 hours. Now it's every 4 hours? What's it going to be next time? Every 8 hours? Nurse, that's exactly right. More yelling. Then her dinner tray goes flying. Nurse, no, no. Steps into the hallway. Call a Node White. Intercom. Code White, 2nd floor. E Ward, room 2200. Code White. 3 security guards come running in. Miss Sunshine is pinned down, under protests from her, almost like trying to throw a cat with each hand at the same time. She's strapped down, legs, arms, wrists, and neck. Resident doctor comes in, tells her she can wait, or have 2 Advil. She says, and I quote, No, I don't want drugs that will mess with my mind. Doctor, you're taking morphine. That messes with your mind a lot more than you think. She is then given a choice for Advil, orally, or a suppository. She answers, Not in the mouth. So? Then she learns what a suppository really is. Remember how she is strapped down? Remember how she refuses to wear the jacket? Remember how she's still wearing her only change of clothing? The jeans are then ripped. Crying is had. In between sobs, all I hear is, Ow, 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 it burns, ow, it burns. All I can think of is stop clenching. She's left strapped in, door closed. Reports and paperwork are made out in the hall. She's being left to scream and tire herself out until the meds and morphine kicked in. Silence in the ward is soothing and creepy. Shortly after, when it rains, it pours. Coincidentally, her grandmother comes by to visit her. She somehow got a heads up. While still being strapped in, she's pleading and pleading to be unstrapped so her grandmother doesn't see her like this. Nurses aren't having any of it, though. Once her grandmother left, she starts yelling again. She says she wants to pee right before she pissed herself. Nurses responded, Okay, well, all we had to do was cooperate. You had many, many chances. Now you have to wait in your pee. Cue full exorcist mode for about an hour. They finally unstrapped her after 3 or 4 hours. Honestly, no sympathy. She really needed to be strapped in. Heck, she was 1 step away from assaulting other patients. They brought in a psych to listen to her. Kudos to the hospital, though. They ripped my whole pants. I peed my only pants. My pants are now ruined. Well, guess now you have to wear the jacket. Funny out how that works. So, the next day, there's a doctor now, consulting her. They took away her smokes. They are now refusing to give them to her. When suddenly, the intercom goes off. They called another code white because she was yelling and spat at a senior doctor who was listening to her. The security guards strap her down again. Nurse told her the guards to use face shields because she's a spitter and has unknown VD. She started crying and breaking out. Finally, she broke down, it seemed. The crying was different. A distinctive note of powerless underneath it all. Unmistakable, though. But that was just an illusion, because she went forth psychotic as soon as she unstrapped her for the night. They closed all the doors in the ward, and the nurses and nurses' aide visited each patient and told them that the entire ward had been prescribed Ativan to help us sleep. Opt in, of course, but it's there if they wanted it. The next morning, her kid came in to visit, and I was discharged that afternoon. No idea what happened to her. I don't really care to find out. So the girl across the hall from me, let's not meet again. Back in 2007, I started a tech job with an IP phone void DP1 long distance company. The company is no longer around, and honestly, I don't know how they stayed in business as long as they did. It was really a pyramid scheme, but thankfully, I was on the IT side of things, so I didn't have to sell anything. It was a small, typical tech support call center. The customers would call into Verizon, QQuest, etc., would call in and say DT1 lines were down or outages were there. I was the only female on my team, having to prove myself and show that I'd do anything male counterparts could do. It didn't take long, and the customers respected me for being able to handle things. After making my mark, I decided to take the 10-hour night shifts. I worked Wednesday through Saturday from 1 p.m. to 12 a.m., and after 6 p.m., I was completely alone in the whole building. The rush to get out of the office by 6 p.m. was insane. I wouldn't blame them, though, but I decided having 3 days off was better than 2. Like I said, I was by myself for most of the night. I would have to keep an eye on emails and make sure I answered calls. It was a very slow shift indeed. I would get a lot of video game, reading, or schoolwork done during this time. But sometimes, I would just wander the building, walk around just to get away from my desk for a time. I would have the VoIP phone system connected to my cell phone so no calls would be missed. This allowed me to get to a soda, go get food, and so on. One time while I was up away from my desk, I was going down to the lunchroom to grab a soda. The vending machine was on the basement floor. The basement had a wall of windows and one set of security doors. Same for the main entrance. Only there was one camera facing that door. Nothing else really made me feel very safe. I didn't like going to the basement much because the back of the building faced an arch of dark woods. There was a walking path to the woods, but for some reason, they didn't install lights for the walking path. Never really sure why that was, but it didn't help the creepy factor. Sometimes I would see animals run past, but other times, I felt like someone was just watching me. I always try to make it fast when getting a soda or a snack, but sometimes it didn't feel fast enough. So one night, I was making my way down to the basement of the building to get a soda. It was a slow, dragging night, and needed a little caffeine for a pick-me-up. I counted my money as I walked to make sure that I had enough to get in and out quick. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dart from the glass door back into the darkness. I stopped dead in my tracks and tried to scan the forest, but like I said, it was just blackness. I felt a bit of unease, and everything told me to turn on my heels and go back to my desk. But it was like 9 p.m., and I had a fair bit of time left on my shift before I could blow this pop stand. I tried shaking the feeling off, and briskly walked over to the soda machine and made my selection. The soda dropped, and as I bent down to get it, I heard a loud ping noise. It was as if someone had hit the glass with something. I stood straight up and felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I slowly turned around and was scared to see someone out there. But as I made the full turn, I saw once again nothing but darkness. I thought this was a good time to book it back up to the main floor. I didn't bother with the elevator. I went to the stairs and just ran up them. My heart was already racing from having to go down there in the first place, and then the loud bang,
and now running up 2 flights of stairs? Once I was back at my desk, I sunk down in my chair and tried to calm down. It was just one noise. I was in a building with locked doors and locked inner offices. I kept saying over and over in my head it was just nothing. I was relieved by that, but out of nowhere, I got that feeling of someone watching me again. I peeked up over my cubicle wall and looked around my office. Nothing seemed out of place until I turned to face the front of the building. Outside the first set of doors was a slender, tall, dark male. He was cupping his hands around his eyes to try and see past the reflection of the lights inside. I dropped back down in my cubicle before he caught sight of me. He didn't look like anyone I'd ever seen in the office, and it was a little past 9 p.m. There's no reason why he is checking out my office. As I sit in my chair, I hear the doors shake. I slowly stood up and watched him pull at the handles of the door. They didn't budge, to my relief. But as I watched him, he turned to face me. His face looked bruised or dirty. I couldn't tell which one. Once his eyes locked onto me, he started to bang harder and smacked the glass. I was so scared. It was in the middle of the night. I was by myself and out in the middle of this office building complex. I grabbed my headset and dialed 911. While getting the operator on the line, the guy was walking back and forth from one side of the glass to the next. The 911 asked me what the emergency was. I told them where I worked and what my name was. I needed someone to come out immediately. Told them that there was a guy trying to break into my office building. While speaking with her, the guy disappeared from my view. I tried to look in all directions, but I just didn't see him anymore. I knew he wouldn't just walk off, not with how hard he was trying to bang on the doors. And out of nowhere, a good-sized rock came out of nowhere and smashed into the door. I screamed and went under my desk. The operator asked what happened, and I explained that a rock smashed against the glass window. She asked me if the glass was broken enough to let him in. I didn't want to stand up and look, but she told me to look in order to know where he was now. I crawled out from under my desk and just peeked over my wall and saw a huge crack down the first part of the door. I sank back down and told her to please have an officer hurry. She said they were on their way. I have read many of these stories on sub-articles, and people say that the cops wouldn't get there fast enough. They just weren't kidding. It feels like time is standing still, and you can do absolutely nothing about it. Another smash against the door, but along with that glass-breaking sound, sirens could be heard coming towards my building. It was definitely music to my ears. I told the operator that the police had arrived, and thanked her for all her support. I stood backed up and looked over the cubicle wall, and the red and blue lights were flashing wildly. But the thing I didn't see was the man. The top part of the door was completely smashed, and the rock was lying on the outside of the entryway. The officer came to the front door, and others were out combing the area. I could see their flashlights moving all around the parking lot. The first officer to come in the building and greet me was a very kind man. He was patient with me and let me explain what I saw happen. Soon, my boss arrived and checked on me, then the damage. At some point, my husband was called and told I could be escorted home by one of the officers. I took a few days off and started to look for another job that wasn't by myself at night. When I gave my statement, I explained to the officer that the person could be partnered with my ex-coworkers who was fired a few weeks prior for stealing and just not showing up. He knew when people came and went. He knew where we kept the cell phones we were selling. Not under lock and key, but under a desk of a provisioner, from smartphones to Blackberries, plus VoIP boxes and phone cards. I went on to leave this job a month later and started at a credit card machine company. It was an office full of people, still a call center, but I felt a lot safer there, especially with the security and cameras all over the building. Like I said before, this company is no longer around. It was bought up by another company, and they basically liquidated all the funds that were worth something. So, dirty man who tried to break into my office, let's never meet again. She was always kind of rude. A pudgy lady with annoying sons, and a very weird husband. A lot of kids got taken care of by her, so my parents trusted her to take care of us. Everything was somewhat normal, except for the fact that she was kind of rude to anybody that wasn't her kid. Her kids were pretty misbehaved. They were always fighting, hitting each other with plastic swords, and screaming at the top of their lungs. At one point, the younger toddler had a nap, and she forced all of the children to sit in a corner and be quiet, besides her kids, of course. Odd behavior for a babysitter, but we never thought much about it. Another thing to mention is that she took naps while babysitting, as in, she didn't pay attention to the kids. She just shooed them away and fell asleep. She was also notorious for giving her sons chocolate milk and telling others they had to have water. My sister and I tried to ignore it, but eventually we were kind of annoyed. My sister had a loud mouth, so she told my mom how she treats the kids, and she babysits, versus her own kids. I'd also like to acknowledge that my sister had just turned 4, so she wasn't great with her words. My mom was angry that the babysitter did that, but let it slide, as we were moving in a month, and she didn't know if we were being completely honest. The house we moved to is the house I spent a large majority of my childhood years in. Things were normal since we transitioned into the new house, until we got the calls. We changed our phone numbers, so we weren't sure how the babysitter and her husband found it so quickly. She called every day, saying that we needed to pay her, and that we owed her money. She was just angry that we had moved, and we were currently on the lookout for a babysitter that was closer to home. My parents received these calls every day, and they consisted of the babysitter or her husband screaming, which meant that I would hear the voicemails or calls quite clearly. They kept harassing us, and my parents grew agitated and worried. It all ended one night at around 10 p.m. when my sister and I woke to the sound of banging on the front door. It continued for a good 10 minutes, and it was very loud. My sister was freaked out, so I decided to go see if my parents were awake. They were. They were just opening their eyes, kind of confused as to what was going on. My dad told my mom to stay upstairs, and he foolishly went downstairs to get to the door. As I stood at the railing nervously, my sister stayed in the bedroom because she was unaware of what was actually happening. When he opened the door, I felt sick and terrified. There was my babysitter and her husband, who managed to find us not only from our address, but also our phone number. The husband started screaming at the top of his lungs, yelling, "You owe us money! Pay us now!" and shaking a knife. Yes, he had a knife in his hand. My dad told him that he didn't, and warned him to leave, unless he wanted the cops to be called. He really didn't care. My dad went to close the door, but he stuck his foot in it, attempting to get inside. My babysitter was also yelling, but I couldn't hear what she had said. We had a phone upstairs, so my mother quietly called the cops, as my dad struggled to get the door closed. Once he did, the begging and screaming continued. They wouldn't leave our property. I was freaked out, so I started crying. My sister saw me crying, and she did the same. Long story short, about an hour after they left and the cops arrived, having just missed them, my parents knew their information based on the fact that they babysat us, so it wasn't hard to track them, and they were arrested. I always wondered if their children were home alone or at a sleepover when this happened, especially at a time so late. Regardless, they were released a few days later, but were not allowed to step foot near our house. I'm not sure if the woman still babysits, but if she does, I feel terrible for the kids. We never really knew what their intentions were that night. My dad saw the knife and knew that they were up to no good. All I can say is, psychotic babysitter and her husband, let's not meet ever again. For context, I was a 20-year-old female, a female and a senior in college at that. During my senior year in college, I was following a particular politician and was going to rallies and other events in my spare time. Me and my friends were having a ball and loved being involved. One particular rally I went to was in the city. My friends and I took a train in and enjoyed ourselves. On the way back to the university, I noticed a guy sitting across from us that had recognized from the campus. On the way back to our university, I noticed a guy sitting across from us that I had recognized from the campus. He was pretty cute, and I remember seeing him around as we must have had some mutual friends. I said hi to him, and to my delight, he also recognized me. We spoke for a few minutes and discovered we were both at the same rally. By the end of the train ride, he asked me for my phone number. I remember thinking, wow, a cute guy, and we have some things in common? So I gave him my number, but didn't think much past that. About a week later, I received a text from him. He asked me if I'm free this weekend, and if I could be interested in meeting up and having a drink or two. This particular time was during a break from school, so not many people were around. For whatever reason, I had chose not to go home. In my naive mind at the time, I thought, great, I have a place to call myself. I meet him at our local bar, and we have a few drinks. It was pretty quiet for a Friday, as it was break time, and after an hour or two, decided to leave. I invited him back to my place for a bottle of wine and to hang out some more. He wound up staying the night and leaving in the morning, but when I woke up, for whatever reason, I had an uneasy feeling. Nothing bad had happened per se. I just didn't like how things had went. I felt like he was so serious, not laughing or smiling the entire evening. Although he always had a drink in his hand, I realized he wasn't really drinking them. The entire evening, he was kind of shifty and nervous. The only way I can describe it is like he was on a mission and waiting for something. These were all red flags to me. I felt bad, but I just was not interested in this guy. To my relief, he didn't text me for a while after that, and I assumed he came to the realization that it wasn't a good match. That is until about 2 or 3 weeks later. He writes me a message telling me that he's been busy, but really wants to meet this weekend and catch up with me. This particular weekend, my sister was having a large party for her husband's birthday at their house a few towns away. A few of my friends and I were going, and there was always a large group of people at their parties, about 50 to 60 at most. Now, let me be clear. These parties were not their typical get wasted and stay up till the cops get called type of college parties. They were more of an adult-type party, given my sister's husband is fairly older than us. Don't get me wrong, there was plenty of drinking going on, and they were very fun. Just more of an adult-type barbecue with day drinking. Me and my 2 girlfriends were going to spend the night, as I was going to drive there, but obviously we would be drinking. The party started early, at around 12 p.m. Against my better judgment, I invited him to the party, thinking it couldn't hurt. I gave him the address and the time to show up. He seemed very interested and agreed to come. The day of the party was so fun, and my friends and I were having a blast. I must admit, I did have a sinking feeling and was not looking forward to seeing the guy. Then, to my absolute and utter relief, I get a text from him saying he will be unable to make it. I finally could relax and just enjoy the party. At about 12 a.m., everyone exhausted from the day of full-on drinking, and the party is winding down. Most of all, the guests have gone home except my friends and I, and a few other guys. And of course, my sister and her husband. My sister has one guest room, which was taken, and a fully carpeted and finished basement. We had various blankets and pillows, and we're all going to sleep down there on the couches, or pretty much anywhere that we could lay. As I am about to go down to the basement and get ready for sleep, the man walks through the front door. No knock, no text, no anything, just confidently walks straight into the house. I don't know why, but my initial reaction was fear. I pretended to be happy to see him and gave him a small hug. I asked him why he was there, to which he never gave a real response. All of the lights were out and everyone was gone. I was gesturing around and hinting at him that the party was over and that he had missed it. I felt bad that he made the effort and decided to speak with him for a few minutes before I went to bed. We talked. I told him I was going to get ready for bed and that I'm sorry he missed the party. He says, "Yeah, that's fine. This dude is just not getting the hint I leave." I leave the room and go to change my clothes and set myself up a bed, brush my teeth, etc. I'm just hoping that he will leave, but I don't hear any movement from the other room. When I come back to the living room to check and see if he's actually still there, he is. And he is asleep on the couch. I obviously found this strange, but just assumed that it was late and that he must have been really tired. He didn't seem out of place as there were various other people sleeping at the house as well. I went to the basement and found myself a place to sleep on the floor. About 30 minutes to an hour later, I'm lying on the floor, still awake, thinking about how weird it is that he just showed up out of nowhere. It's pitch black, and there's a few other people sleeping there, including my friends. I hear someone in the dark slowly come down the stairs. I see they are holding a cell phone light to guide them. As the figure reached the bottom of the steps, I see that it's him. Now, he has never been to this house that is in the nice suburban area, and I did immediately think it's weird that he would randomly be walking through a house of a person he doesn't know. I pretend to be asleep. As I lie there frozen, I suddenly feel a tap on my shoulder. He doesn't say a word. He is over me and trying to wake me up. I don't move and pretend to be asleep. I lay there in the dark silence, and I am listening for his footsteps to walk away. I can tell he is holding a light over me. Then, with no warning, this man takes a step back and with his boot on, kicks me full force in the face. I'm not talking about a little tap with his foot to wake me up. No, full-on force boot kick directly in my face. My face goes numb. I don't know what just happened. I can feel blood running down my nose. I open my eyes and look at him, and all I can remember saying is something like, "Why did you do that?" He just stared at me blankly and said nothing, turned around and walked back up the steps. I lay there paralyzed in fear. My heart is beating 1,000,000 times a minute. I don't know how long it was until I garnished the courage to get up, but eventually I army crawl in the dark over to my friend. Another man near her wakes up as well, and I explained what happened. We are all half drunk, dazed and confused to say the least. I can't stay in this basement. I know he left, but I was just so scared. My friend and the other guy offer to take me upstairs so I can sleep in my sister's room. I go into my sister's room and lay next to her bed on the floor. I shut the door behind me, but unfortunately, there was no lock. I don't know how, but eventually I fell asleep. At some point, I wake up to my sister leaning over me. She asked, "What happened to your face, and why are you in my room?" Right as I'm about to answer her, my friend who had helped me the night before comes flying into the room. She tells us that the guy is still there and asleep on the couch. She runs out, and I can hear her screaming at him to get up and get the heck out of the house. I hear him arguing back and asking her where I am. My friend tells him I've left, and he begins arguing that he knows my car is still there, and that I hadn't taken my purse. Eventually, he leaves. After that night, he wrote me a message a few days later as if nothing had happened, asking me to hang out again. I blocked him, and have never heard from him again after that. I graduated only 2 months later, and thankfully never even saw him on campus again. To this day, I have no idea why he kicked me in the face, and how he had the balls to stay after that. I have learned my lesson about giving out my phone number, so creepy basement kicker, let's not meet again. When I was 20 years old, I worked as a delivery girl for a pretty popular pizzeria in my area. Initially, I worked the late morning to mid-afternoon shifts. But when the guy who delivered for the late night shift ended up getting fired due to him losing his license because of a DUI, I was placed on the night shift since my boss hired a family friend who could only work my shift for whatever reason. I really didn't want this shift because you never know if people who order late at night actually want a pizza or if they have other intentions in mind. Unfortunately, my boss was an asshole and essentially told me that if I wasn't willing to work the night shift, I was fired as well. I wasn't exactly in a position where I could be out of work, albeit temporarily, so I reluctantly worked that shift. The first month of this shift went by without any issues until I had to deliver a pizza to a house that just barely made our delivery radius. I punch it in on my GPS, and the house was located in a pretty suburban part of the city. I arrive, and it's about 11 p.m. The block was extremely quiet, decently lit, and mostly littered with modern townhouses. But the house I delivered to was a duplex. I rang the doorbell and wait for about 30 seconds. No answer. I ring it again and wait another 30 seconds. Still no answer. I'm standing there getting pretty nervous that something's about to go down. But thankfully, a man opens the door. He looked like he was in his late 40s. He was pretty tall, maybe a little over 6 foot, and he was very skinny. I tell him his pizza is here, and he just stands there staring at me. I asked if he was okay, and he responded by saying, "Yeah, I'm fine, sorry. I got off work not too long ago, and I'm zoning out a bit." Fair enough, I suppose. He hands me the money. I hand him the pizza, and as I'm taking the change, he says, "You're really beautiful, you know that?" Not really thinking too much into it, I thanked him for the compliment and gave him his change. I said goodnight, and he did too. I walked back to my car and finished my deliveries for the night. A few days later, I got a delivery order to the same place. I head over there around the same time as last time and rang the doorbell. He answers the door very excitedly and says, "Hey, it's you again. How are you?" I told him I was tired and can't wait to go home, to which he chuckled and said, "I know the feeling pretty well." As he was pulling out his wallet, as he's counting his money, he asked me what my name is. Being kinda tired at this point and not really thinking straight, I stupidly told him my name. As I'm making change, he asked me if he could have my number, as he'd love to hang out with somebody as gorgeous as I am. Whoa, buddy, pump the brakes. I've literally only met this guy like twice to deliver a pizza. I had no idea who this guy was, and I'm positively he barely knew who I was as well. Another thing to mention is that I looked way too young. I was told by numerous people that I still looked like I was 15, and I was hoping he thought differently and wasn't hitting on what he thought was a teenager. I'm just standing there awkwardly for a few seconds before I muster out, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend." He gets upset and says, "Oh, okay, I see." We stand there in silence before I tell him to have a good night and walk back to my car. He says nothing and still stands at the doorway, staring at me until he finally went back inside once I started my car. I got a pretty creepy vibe from this guy, and even brought it up to my coworkers, and they agreed it was pretty creepy. Except for the boss, who overheard everything and claimed I was making up stories and trying to gain sympathy for having to take the shift. Fucking asshole. A week later, as I'm working the night shift, and we get the order from the same guy again, and this is when the shit really hits the fan. I arrive at the house at around 10:30 p.m., and keep in mind that from my perspective on the road, it doesn't look like a single light is on in the house. I got out of my car, and I walked to the front door with the pizza box in my arms. As I'm approaching the door, it quickly swings open to reveal the man, except this time he was wearing a suit, and I jumped back a little. He laughs and said, "I'm sorry if I scared you. I saw you out the window, and I figured I would just open the door now so that you wouldn't have to ring my doorbell." I was getting scared because, as I mentioned before, there were no lights on in the house. So was he sitting in the dark this whole time? And if so, why? I nervously laughed and said it's okay. He asked me if I liked his suit, to which I said, yes, I do. He then asks me, would you like to go on a date with me tonight? What? The fuck? I once again told him I have a boyfriend, to which he chuckles, gets closer to me, and says, honey, there's no way a girl your age is in a serious relationship. If you go on a date with me, I'll show you how a real man treats a girl. He grabs the pizza box from me and throws it onto the side and grabs me by my arms really hard. I'm officially shitting bricks at this point and trying not to cry from the fear that was overwhelming me. I start pleading with him, dude, please. I just want to go home. I don't want to go on a date tonight. He just stares at me with the most sinister look I've ever seen on someone's face and says, I really don't care. Get inside now. We're going to have a good time. He starts trying to pull me into the house, and I'm trying to resist as hard as I can. After a bit of struggling, he lets go of one of my arms and starts grabbing something out of his pocket, which I presumed was a knife. I did something to this day that I am still thankful that worked. I used my free arm to punch him as hard as I could in the stomach. This stuns him for a few seconds, and he loosens his grip on me, allowing me to break free. I quickly run to my car, and as I get in, he runs at me and tries pulling me out of the car, holding the knife in the other arm, and even yells, why are you making this so freaking difficult? I grab a half-empty soda bottle I had in the cup holder and throw it at him, and luckily it hits his head, and he lets me go. I slam the door, and then all of a sudden, he jumps right back on the hood of my car, starts scratching and banging on the windshield with his knife. I put the car in reverse, and quickly back out of the spot, and quickly reverse down the road with him desperately trying to hold on. He's banging on my hood, screaming, stop the freaking car! I turned on into the next road as swiftly as possible, and luckily he falls off the hood of my car. I slammed the gas as hard as I could to get as far away from that sick bastard as I could. In my panic state, I drove a couple blocks down the street and kept making turn after turn onto another side block as I feared I was being followed. Eventually I reached a red light and slammed on the brakes and just sat at the intersection frozen from what had just happened. I began crying and violently shaking as I was sitting there. It dawned on me that I came so close to losing my life, and I couldn't help but feel I shouldn't have been alive. Once the light turned green, I pulled over to the side and just sat there crying. Eventually, I get the energy to drive back to the pizzeria, and almost immediately after I walk in, my coworker knew something was wrong after seeing me. I particularly broke down in front of him, and everyone else came to the front wondering what was going on. I fought my tears and explained everything that had just happened. My coworker confronted me, and my boss surprised me and began apologizing profusely for what had happened and for putting me on the night shift. He took me into the office and handed me the phone to call the cops. They arrived at the store, and I gave them my statement, as well as taking pictures of any marks on myself, as well as any scratches on my car from the encounter of evidence. My coworker followed behind me as I drove home, and I collapsed on my bed, and strangely enough, I managed to fall asleep. I quit my job the next day, and luckily, a friend of mine managed to hook me up with a job at her clothing store. As far as the psycho goes, 2 days later I received an update from the police. The entire duplex was owned by the guy's brother who lived on the right side with his wife, and the psycho lived on the left side of the duplex. I learned that he had been in and out of jail constantly at first for robberies and assaults, but later on, it was for sexual crimes. He had been released from jail about 5 months before this encounter for having it with a minor. When they arrived at the house, he was long gone, and his family had no idea where he ran off to, but the police insisted they would find him. And indeed, they did, but not alive. I spent the next 2 months in fear that he would find me and finish what he had in mind, but the police contacted me and updated me on the case. Apparently, he fled to another city nearby and attempted to kidnap a teenager walking along late at night on a street. Luckily, someone happened to be looking out the window at the time, called the cops, and the police caught him trying to force her into his car. He manages to flee, and the police chase after him. He blew a red light near a busy boulevard, and a van slammed right into the driver's side of his car. By some sort of miracle, the driver of the van only sustained minor injuries, while the psycho succumbed to his own wounds, long before the ambulance even arrived. I thanked the officers for everything they did and for informing me, and I walked out of the station. I walked down the street, and I light up a cigarette as I'm taking in everything I had just been told. I don't wish death on anyone, but after hearing about this, I felt relieved. I felt relieved that he wouldn't hurt anyone anymore. I was relieved that I would never have to encounter him ever again, and that I wouldn't have to go through this with charging him and reliving what happened every night. My last experience 2 years ago before this was scary, but I think this one takes the cake as being the scariest, as I am alone and face to face with this psycho. Who knows where I'd be if he managed to pull me into his house?
A few years ago, I was camping with my sister-in-law and 2 nieces for the weekend at a local camp that's on the lake and not far from our house. We had picked a spot that was about 5 feet from the shore, and there weren't many people around us since most people chose the electric lots to set up camp. And the area that we were in was a primitive area. The spot where we were at is the tip of a peninsula-like section of the area, so there were people passing by jet skis throughout the day and whatnot. You could anchor a fishing boat around where we were and fish, but you would not waste your time since the traffic from the other boats and jet skis were in and out so much that they would run all for the line. So there weren't any fishermen out there. My 2 nieces were playing in the grass while my Sil and me were putting up the tent, unpacking the van, etc. And I noticed a small fishing boat anchored out in the lake right across from our campsite, and the guy in it was staring at us. I wouldn't normally think anything of it because it is a lake after all, but what made me pause was I didn't see any fishing poles sticking out of the boat. I never saw him cast out, and the guy in the boat was just sitting there. This wasn't a nice bass boat, or a bass boat that would kick back and relax in. It was just a green, all-metal boat that had benches to sit on instead of actual seats, and there was a faded rebel flag sticking up from the back. We get the tent set up so that we decide to just paddle around for a bit. I noticed the guy had left, and I didn't mention anything to my Sil about the guy and the boat because he really wasn't doing anything besides being strange. But with my nieces being there, I wanted to keep an eye on him. After a while, we decided to go swimming. I was too concerned with making sure my nieces were okay in the water that I wasn't paying attention to anything around me. At one point I had turned around and saw the boat out in the water in the same spot, and the guy staring at us again. I was starting to get a really creeped out feeling for the main fact the guy left, came back, and was still sitting out in the middle of the water in his boat, just staring. At this point, I figured I'd better say something to my Sil. We got out of the water, got the kids dried off, dressed, and decided that we should cook dinner. And the guy stayed out there the entire time. My nieces didn't want to stay the night, so my brother came to take them home. When my brother pulled up, the guy took off, so that's how I saw that flag was a faded rebel flag. It gets dark, and we were sitting by the campfire, just talking and enjoying the quiet summer night on the lake. It's about 10 p.m., and I hear a boat approaching, which was weird, because now the lake is dead. The only lights around us are the street lights from across the way, and the campfire, so when the boat passed by us, I see the lights shining through that faded flag. We were like, oh shit, he's back, and we started to get a nervous feeling. Another 15 minutes later, he would pass by again. We knew it was him every time because of that flag, and the sound of his trolley motor. There was no denying it. It was the same guy. This was going on back and forth and lasted about 2 hours, and we were at our wits' end since at this point he would tie up his boat to the other side of the peninsula, take a quick walk through the woods, and he's at our campsite. With the intervals being so consistently inconsistent, we had no idea what he was doing in between that 15-minute time frame, and we had no idea if he was even going to come back through again. Hell, the sound of the trolley motor gave us a few minutes of relief since we knew it was in the water and not on land coming for us. We are in the primitive area, which meant no electricity, so we didn't have a cell phone. The campgrounds do have park rangers that drive by to check everything out, but he had already driven by before this back and forth started, so there was no telling when he would come back. There wasn't anything we could do, so we just kept our ears open for any noises and pointed our flashlights at the trees to make sure he wasn't coming through them. Finally, the park ranger came through. We stopped him and explained what was happening. He said that he would make his trips more frequent to check on us if we need him before he comes back by to drive to the ranger station. But there wasn't anything we could do since the guy was on the lake and the park rangers don't have boats. It sucked, but at least someone knew what was going on. An hour or so had passed by since the last lakeside drive-by, so we were starting to think that he was done for the evening and that we were safe to go to bed. In mid-conversation, we heard the boat again, but this time he stopped the boat out in the water, flashed a bright spotlight on us, and let out this "Yee-haw" type yell, and then sped off. My Sil and I immediately jumped up out of our chairs, got in the car, and drove to the ranger station. The ranger went to one of the other campers that had boats and asked them if they would mind driving him around the lake looking for this boat. They ended up recruiting 5 other boats to look for this guy. It took them about 30 or 45 minutes to find the guy and get the cops to get down there. The park ranger pulls up to our site and puts us in the car to drive us to where the cops have the guy so we can identify him. The cops pull him out of the back seat. We stay in the park ranger's car, and the park ranger shines a spotlight on the guy so we can see him without him seeing us. The best way I can describe this dude is he looked like an anorexic Charles Manson. We tell the park ranger we can't identify him because he never came on land, but if they found him in the boat, then it's him. On the way back to the campsite, the park ranger told us the guy was passed out in the boat, drunk, naked, and had a hunting knife, and showed us the knife he had. The next morning, we packed up and went home.
I really love Craigslist. I'd estimate that I've met maybe 300 people from buying or selling stuff. And for the most part, everyone was nice and harmless. However, I did run into 2 creeps who made me rethink meeting strangers alone to sell stuff. FYI, I was in my early 20s at the time. The first guy, it's 2009, and I'm staying with my parents for the Christmas holiday in a small town in Florida. I'm going through my childhood room and cleaning out the closet and find a giant CD holder full of maybe 100 really shitty CDs. It's the 21st century. No one uses CDs anymore. I figured I'd try to sell the CDs on Craigslist. I put up a listing, 100 CDs from the late 90s and early mid-2000s, mix of pop and rock, all for $35 or best offer. The next day I get an email from a guy named John around 2 p.m. He says that he's in town temporarily and that he wants the CDs. He says he can pick them up after dinner around 8. I email him back my address and number and tell him to text or call when he's on his way. 8 p.m. comes around. I figure I've been stood up, which happens often on Craigslist. No big deal. My dad works for a liquor distribution company and would often do demonstration nights at restaurants and bars and would come home at bar closing time. This night, he gets home at around 3 a.m. I'm in college and a total night owl, so I'm still up probably eating junk food, surfing the web, watching horror flicks. I hear a car pull up. I look out the window and see him sitting in his car eating food. He often stops at Taco Bell on his way home and eats it in his car so my mom doesn't know he's cheating on his diet. Maybe 10 minutes later, my dad comes in and shouts my name. "There is someone here to see you. Can you please tell me why a stranger is showing up at my house at 3 a.m.? Huh? I run downstairs and my dad says some guy pulled up in the driveway and asked for me by name. I walk outside with my dad, and this guy is with maybe mid-30s gets out of his car. He says he's the Craigslist guy who wanted to buy my CDs.
My dad goes back in the house. I tell the guy it's really, really late to just be stopping by, especially without texting first. However, since I'm awake, I go and grab the CDs. He then proceeds to drone on and on about why he's buying the CDs. He says he's engaged to a woman he loves very much, and all he wants to do is make her happy. He said that last week, someone broke into her car and stole all of her CDs. She was really upset and wanted to make it up to her. He looked on Craigslist and found my listing and was really excited because I had a bunch of CDs she used to have. Weird thing is, I didn't list any of the artists or bands because I was lazy, but I didn't think about that at the time. Anyway, he said he was getting it for her as a Christmas gift. He said he was staying with his future in-laws somewhere nearby and their family barbecue ran really late, which is why he never made it at 8 p.m. At this point, I've lost interest and say something along the lines of, "That's sweet. Next time, you should probably call or text the Craigslister instead of just showing up." I hand him the CDs, he hands me the cash, and I go back inside. 3 days later, I start getting texts from an unknown number. "Hey, I don't know my way around this town. Care to tour guide? I could really use a massage. Where can I get a massage in this town? You're Asian. Do you massage? Would you take $40 for an hour? Happy ending?" Me. "Who the hell is this?" "Oh, I'm sorry. I bought the CDs from you the other day. Do you squirt?" I didn't respond, obviously. I show my friends that night and we laugh it off. Then the next day I get more texts. "I still have your address. I'm at the Bank of America near your neighborhood. I just got the 40, babe. Only 3 minutes away. Are you home? You fucking cunt. Stop ignoring me. I'm almost there." I immediately run downstairs to tell my dad and mom. It was nighttime, so we shut off all the lights outside and inside the house. My mom, little brother, and I went in my parents' room in the back of the house. My dad hid behind the curtains of the front bay window with a shovel in his hand. A few minutes later, I heard him run down the front hallway, fling the front door open, and run outside. We heard some faint shouting, so we all walked out of the bedroom. By that time, my dad came back in with his shovel, his face red and his hair disheveled. Apparently, the guy came driving down our street really slow. My dad recognized the car and went running outside with the shovel, yelling obscenities at the guy. The guy peeled off and never came back or texted me again. The second guy. I was moving from Florida to D.C., and I was going to load up my car as much as I could with stuff. However, I lived on the 3rd floor, plus a bit of a walk from my assigned parking spot, so I figured I could use some help. I posted an ad on Craigslist. I said I was looking for someone to help me load some heavy stuff, like TVs, desks, etc. in my car, less than an hour's worth of work, and I'd pay $45. I'd give the very first responder my number and address. He shows up. He was probably about 5'8", 350 pounds of pure fat. The sweat and smell coming off this guy in the Florida heat was pretty nauseating, but I didn't care as long as he did the job right. While he was carting heavy stuff, I was loading lighter things. Whenever I'd go upstairs to grab another load, he'd hurry up after me so he could walk to the stairs behind me. I had the door propped open so he didn't have to worry about me needing to unlock the door for him or anything. When he'd follow me upstairs, he made these weird grunting noises like, mm-hmm, but I assumed it was because he was out of shape. Eventually everything's loaded properly, save for some sweat smears on my stuff. I pay him and he drives off. I go back in my place to finish loading and cleaning. I go about 45 minutes later to put another load in my car, and I see his truck is back, parked across the street from mine. He's sitting in the driver's seat, looking at me. When he sees me notice him, he looks away. I walk over to his window and knock. He rolls it down and asks if I need help or if it was lost, and I ask if he needs help or if he was lost. I was really confused as to why he had come back, and I knew he didn't live near here. He didn't say anything, just rolled his window back up and drove off. Okay, whatever. Of course, 5 minutes later, my phone starts blowing up. I don't recognize the number, so I don't answer the calls. Then texts start rolling in. Him, I bet you taste salty and sweet. Me, who is this? Him, your pussy. Him, what are you up to tonight? I can come back over. I get the sinking feeling it's the Craigslist guy. He had never called me about the job when I gave him my number, so I didn't know what his number was. Him, I like your pink panties. Then I realized he was looking at my dress when I was walking up the stairs. I immediately feel like a total idiot for wearing a dress that day. He then started dialing my number over and over again. I didn't know how to block numbers through Sprint, so I had to just turn my phone off. Later, I was with my guy friend grabbing a bite and turned my phone back on. I got another text from the guy about how he wanted to toss me around like a rag doll and tie me up and make me beg for it. I show the text to my friend and tell him the story. The Craigslist creep then proceeds to start blowing up my phone again. So my friend answers and says he is going to cut his dick off and feed it to his dog if he ever contacts me again. I moved the next day, so I never had to worry about him randomly showing up in his truck again. Since then, I've bought and sold stuff on Craigslist, but I always make sure people meet me at a public place. I also stalk people's email addresses, Google Plus accounts, and etc. It was the midsummer, on a Sunday, when I planned to meet one of my girlfriends in San Bernardino. This happened to be a year ago. I was 15 at the time and dressed in a pretty provoking manner. I wore Cortez shoes, khaki dickies, big shirts, the usual Latino gang attire. No one really wanted to mess with me, especially when I'm pretty big. 200 pounds, 5'11", and I have a mean look. Bald head and a thin scar that reached down the side of my face. From a fight I got into before. I also have a few amateur, self-inflicted tattoos down my forearm and hands that are pretty meaningless, but more creepy and ugly. I also know how to fight. I've been in boxing ever since I got out of the psychiatric hospital in Chino Hills. Back to the story. I took the bus to visit one of my girlfriends. I got to her house in the morning, about 11 o'clock. She complained that she texted me, but I had no messages from her. I left her house about 6 and caught the last bus home. I thought I was home free until the driver told me that the bus was out of service. The sun was beginning to go down. It was dark when the bus driver left. I pulled out my phone to call my mom. I had an unread message from my phone company saying my phone service had been disconnected because of non-payment. That's great. This is probably why the girls' texts weren't going through. I'm stuck in the middle of the most poverty-stricken counties, with no way to contact my parents or even get home. I was in front of a theater by Regal San Bernardino, 14 and RPX, and behind the Carousel Mall. A few people loitering at the bus stop rushed by and asked if I was selling dope. I walked away and was spooked by a homeless lady, throwing bottles and screaming at the top of her lungs with no apparent reason. I ran a block away, looking for a payphone, a way to call my parents. I reached a McDonald's, where I was planning on calling my parents with their free Wi-Fi. My phone died when I got there. I paid for a drink and sat down. I was so helpless. I looked around to see if I could ask somebody if I could use their phone to call my parents. There was a man sitting over at a table. I approached him and asked him if I could use his phone. He said yes. As I frantically dialed my house phone, my mom answered and said she was on her way to pick me up. This man told me to sit with him, to calm down and eat a burger with him that he ordered. When I went to refill my cup, I glanced over and saw him putting something into the burger he placed at my side. I sat down with him and told him that I wasn't hungry. He said all right, and placed it on the tray, not touching it again. He was an old man, had glasses, and was pretty fit for his age, and he was missing his pinky and index finger on his right hand, which made him eat fries really abnormally. He ate really fast, as if somebody was going to take his food away. Swallowing without even chewing, he was probably 50 years old, or maybe a little bit more. He told me he was Siberian, working for a government project. He said he gets a lot of money, and he has his white Mercedes-Benz outside. He offered me a ride home, where I declined and told him my mother was already coming. He gave me a creepy smirk which rang chills down my spine, and the hairs on my neck stood up. I was about to flip. I wanted to beat the crap out of him. I was furious. Why was he doing this to me? I thought this only happened in movies. I'm a big guy. No one really should mess with me. Look at my tattoos. Look at my appearance. You shouldn't mess with me. I heard my mama's voice as the front door opened, and I felt calm. I got up and waved goodbye. My mom and I at a red light when I noticed the white Mercedes-Benz roll up behind my mom's car. This isn't a usual car to see in this poverty-stricken area, so I was pretty sure it was the man. I thought he was going a different direction, but once my mom got on the freeway, I knew he was following us. Each lane we crossed, he did. The exit we got out of, he did. I didn't want to alarm my mom, so I asked her if she can stop at the store so I can buy us some chips. We pulled into the parking lot. As I saw the man drive off, noticing the shine of lights off of his glasses. I wasn't being paranoid. When my mom drove me home, I didn't notice any car trailing us. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed the Mercedes pass by. How in the hell? I was freaking out as I noticed the shine of the light off of his glasses. Now he knew where I lived. I didn't tell my family anything. I was sure I was going to give my dad a heart attack. He wasn't in the best conditions. My mom was already stressing out about it, and my brothers were too young. I had a gun under my mattress that I used to feel tough, but I knew I needed it now more than ever. I was the black sheep in the family, so I was usually left home alone. I heard my blue-nosed pit bull barking in the front yard. I looked outside the window and noticed the man passing by, trying to secretly take pictures of my house. I saw his car pass by my house a few minutes after. This happened the next day as well. It happened a few times and then stopped. Though when I was with my homeboys after school a month later, I noticed the Mercedes parked on the opposite side of the road from where I usually exit school. It was after detention, so no one was around. I knew it was him because I could see the shine off the light of his glasses. I told my friends, since it was about 8 of us, cholo-looking teenagers. My homies joked before I even told them about this guy, saying I'm crazy and that they'll beat his ass if they see him. My homeboys immediately ran over to the car, and my friend, Doughboy, pulls out a gun from his backpack. I was frozen with adrenaline and fear. I knew he was bluffing because the gun is never loaded. It's just for show. Or was it? I debate that, to this day. Keep in mind, after this, it's a dispute between us. No cops can be involved. I can't call the cops on him anymore. What am I going to say? We pulled a gun out on him? We threatened to kill him? We can't even prove that he's stalking me. Besides, it's my word against this old man, who is rumored to work for the government. I also have a police and mental health record, so I definitely am unreliable, and I'm going back to the loony bin, or back to juvie if the cops find out. I was scared, but at the same time my heart started jumping faster and faster. It was a mixture of adrenaline and fear, because I don't want to go back to the loony bin or back to JDAC. We surrounded the car, and Doughboy signaled for the man to roll down his window. With the gun pointed at him, he put the window down. He had a smirk as Doughboy literally put the gun to his neck. He had his phone in one hand, trying to hide it, and Doughboy picked it up. It was an iPhone, set at recording from his lock screen. There was only one video. We looked at the video and it was us, walking out of school, the camera zooming in on me. The video stopped recording when we ran towards the car. Doughboy deleted the video and told the man these exact words, that I'll never forget. "You old sack of shit, you better stop creeping out my homeboy or I'll end you." "I'll do it right now," he said, cocking the trigger back. I can see this old man turn pale with fear. "But I don't want to ruin your nice car. Now leave before I change my mind. I don't ever want to see you here again. Anywhere near this town. I own these streets, bitch. PIC, Doughboy 909's finest." We pulled Doughboy off the man, and he drove off. I never saw him again. It's been 1.5 years that this had happened, and I never told anybody about this, except for my homies. Damn, I'm excited. Just talking about this. I still sleep with the gun under my pillow, and I have hellish nightmares about the man eating fries with 3 fingers. But I'm glad, first off. I'm glad I'm still alive because most people don't live through stuff like this. Second, I'm glad to have some erratic, gangbanging friends. Third, I'm glad I never saw that man after. Creepy rich stalker Siberian old man that I met at McDonald's, let's not meet again. For your own safety and mine. I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere in eastern Washington. The town I grew up in had only 2 bars in it, a post office, a gas station, convenience store, and 2 schools. Elementary and the high school and middle school was further down the road. Since there weren't a lot of kids, the middle school and high school kids were all in the same building. Like I said, small town. This town, though, takes place in the neighboring town 15 minutes or so down the road when I was 15 years old. My best friend Nathan lived in town right in the middle of the university in some of the lower income apartments. These apartments weren't that bad for being low income. Like other places, they were nicely kept up and not too many druggies around the area, but a lot in their surroundings. I preferred hanging out in his apartment and around the university that my shabby falling apart trailer resided in the middle of Methsville. Nathan and I known each other since kindergarten and have been best friends since the very first day. We ended up both getting in trouble for writing on the walls, so we got put into the chairs facing the wall together, and we had gotten into trouble ever since. We went to the same school for the first couple of years after he moved up here from Alabama. Eventually, his parents divorced in 3rd grade. Him, his 2 sisters, and their mother moved out to the next town over, so we had to go to school out there. We could never just be best friends for life, so we kept in touch with phone calls, emails, and little letters telling each other about our days at school and how much we hated our teachers and stuck-up peers. Work we were proud of. We even got to hang out at each other's houses for entire weekends every weekend. I had just turned 15 in December when I had to deal with my bio mother dying of a drug overdose. Both of my parents were heavy drug users, and my father is still to this day a drug dealer. I had a lot of horror stories growing up because of this, but those are for another time. A couple months after my mother died, my father went to jail for a bit. I don't remember how long, but it was a couple of months. He was in and out of jail a lot throughout my entire life. When he came out, he was different. He was worse than before. He'd always been the devil himself to me, but somehow he had gotten even worse. Months later, right before summer started, my bio father kicked me out because I told somebody something that happened to me. Again, another story for another time. 15 and on my own, I was couch surfing for a while, around my shitty tiny town, just trying to finish out that year of school before summer hit. I felt like once summer hit, and I had been more free, I would be able to figure out what I would do about everything. This was the early days of Facebook, and not everyone had a phone in their pocket, so just like any normal kid those days, the library is where I spent most of my days. We had an hour time limit on Billy. One of my names of the computers available for public use at the library. Slow as all hell, and loud as shit, I would scroll through Facebook seeing if any of my friends were on, see if I could crash with them and their family for a couple of days. Nathan was the only one that was on, and he was also the only one that had messaged me. His mother was going to be gone for a couple of days for something or another, and his sisters were staying at their father's house. Nathan and his father were never on good terms, so he didn't go over there to visit as much as his sisters. He was going to stay home alone for almost a week, and his mother agreed on me staying with him while everybody was gone. She just wasn't able to come get me, and the people I was staying with didn't have the time or means to transport me into the next town. We agreed to walk down the trail that connects the towns, meet up in the middle, and walk back together, smoking cigarettes his mother had gotten him, and weed we had obtained. It was sunset by the time we got to the opening of the university. This town is a lot bigger than the one I normally lived in. A decent amount of abandoned buildings to explore. Lots of things to get into, and gigantic universities to explore, day and night. It was like heaven for a rebellious teenager. There was also some areas from the patches of woods. It was summer, so a lot of the college kids had gone home for the summer. Not a lot of people to bother you, and the students that stayed over the summer didn't want to be bothered and didn't want trouble, so we got away with a lot. Complete and total freedom. It was about middle of June, and getting pretty hot outside. Nathan and I were out almost every day and night of that week longboarding around town and the university, smoking pot in every alleyway and hidey hole we could find. We went to one of his friend's house downtown to get even more stoned and smashed in a small get-together in her very large falling-apart house. Now, other than his friend Anne, Nathan and I didn't know anyone else there. Once we walked in through the front gate, I felt like something was a little off, like someone's eyes were boring into my soul. When I looked around at the other faces around me, I didn't see anyone other than Anne looking in our direction. She greeted Nathan with a hug and glanced at me, probably trying to figure out who I was in her very hammered state of mind. Then as she swayed as she led us through a small crowd of people into her kitchen and grabbed us cups and started filling them with her own terrifying concoction of booze. She had a talent for making drinks. It could be 90% alcohol and you wouldn't even taste it. You wouldn't even know you were drinking booze until you've already chugged half of it through her signature smoothie straw and started searching for something behind you to lean against. We listened to all the good old dubstep and EDM at that time. Everyone drunk as hell, tripping balls off Molly and shrooms, smoking more than my little heathen heart could handle, and doing glove tricks. Shuffling with half-naked girls dancing around with hula hoops. You know, normal middle-of-the-week night for kids like us over the summer at that time. After 3 of Anne's drinks, I could barely remember my name, let alone the eerie being-watched feeling I had felt when I first arrived. Nathan hadn't drank as much as me, but he was pretty shit-faced himself. At about 1 a.m, everyone started to leave the party. Nathan and I had our fill of booze and decided it would be a better idea if we walked home instead of attempt to ride on our boards back to his place. We ended up not even being able to find them in the dark with our double vision. Anne showed us out of her back gate, and we started our long trek back. About halfway through the college, we were passing the science building when I heard an extra set of footsteps in a pretty dark area of the building. I clung onto Nathan's arm like drunk girls do, and whispered into his ear that I thought we were being followed. Nathan didn't flinch or even talk above a whisper, but he tried to convince me that it was just the echo of our footsteps against the building, or a drunk college student making their way home. But I realized that I felt the same being watched feeling that I had gotten when we had first gotten to Anne's. We got to the market, that's only a few blocks, about maybe half a mile from his house, and stopped to smoke a bowl and hang out outside after hours to feel like the cool kids at our spots posted out front of the store like a sad parody of Jay and Silent Bob. We drunkenly and very stoned started to freestyle. Nathan was good and still is, but I was just a dumb, edgy teenager that thought I was good. Again, I forgot about the feeling while walking here, and I threw out there that we should go through a short stroll through the graveyard and down the hill, through the park that was right next to his apartments. He thought it was an amazing idea, and we took off laughing like idiots, singing along to Insane Clown Posse, playing his iPod. When we got to the graveyard, it was really quiet, almost unnaturally quiet, even with Nathan's iPod still playing dully in the background. The moon was bright and high up in the sky, and the stars were beautiful and shining through the sky like diamonds. It just seemed darker than it should be for the kind of night. We were drunk and creeped out, so we wanted to get the hell out of Dodge, and fast. I smelt something weird in the air, and it just felt like my body was trying to tell me something was there. Something dangerous, even though I couldn't see it. I made Nathan stop and shut his music off. We were drunk and creeped out, so we wanted to get the hell out of Dodge, and fast. I felt something weird in the air, and it just felt like my body was trying to tell me something was there. Something dangerous, even though I couldn't see it. I made Nathan stop and shut his music off. Do you feel that? I asked him, not even knowing what it was that I felt, let alone how to explain what I felt if he decided to ask what I meant. To my surprise, though, he just sighed and said, "Yeah. Something doesn't seem right, but I think it's just paranoia because of how much we have drank and smoked." I tried to convince myself that it was just that, and I could see Nathan trying to force himself to believe it as well. But I could tell by the way he looked on his face that he believed just as much as I did. "Let's just hurry up and get down the damn hill," I said, regretting having the idea to go through the graveyard in the first place. We picked up the pace the best we could, being two shit-faced drunk 15-year-olds terrified as hell, stumbling through the dark graveyard. When we got down the hill, Nathan pulled out a smoke and lit it up as we walked. "Hey bud, you got an extra one of those? And a light I could bum from you?" a raspy, smoke-stained male voice said from a park bench just out of eyesight. I just about shit myself when he spoke. Yeah. "Here," Nathan said, holding his hand out to the man that had walked towards us closer into the light from the street lamp further down the path. He had bad scabs and pick marks all over his face and neck. He was shaking just about as bad as me, but his wasn't because of fear. He was 100% tweaking out of his fullest extent while he stood there with us asking all kinds of weird questions. Not like really personal questions, but questions like how long have we been going to school here, and have either of you been burned on the arm by a cigarette? The last question freaked me out, and there were many others he asked that sent chills up my spine. I kept my mouth shut, but every time we tried to walk off, Tweaker Guy would put his arms out and try to change the subject. Living between these two towns my entire life, and because of my druggy parents, I am very used to tweakers and shady people of all sorts. So of course we knew one of the biggest golden rules of Tweaker Town: do your best not to do something to piss them off, and just wait until something else gains their attention. Nathan was getting irritated by this guy and his nonsense, and their smokes were almost gone, so he just wanted to leave and get back to his house fast. So did I. Nathan tried to let the guy know nicely that we needed to hurry up and get back home. That's when the Tweaker Guy did the most unexpected thing. He spoke in the most demonic voice I could have ever imagined, as a large grotesque smile spread across his face.
"You're never leaving here," he said,
then started opening his mouth slowly like how Pennywise does in the original It when Eddie met him in the shower drain. After he said that, it was like his whole body just went rigid. He just froze up and went silent with his mouth open so far it looked like his jaw was going to snap. Nathan walked up a little closer to him and asked him if he was all right, and if he had a phone on him. If there was anyone he wanted us to call because we thought he was really messed up. He put his head back down, but his mouth was still agape, like it was being pulled apart. His eyes darted to him, and then to me before his head just started shaking uncontrollably. Not like going around in circles like in The Exorcist, but just like shaking around, violently back and forth. Nathan grabbed me by the arm and jerked me back towards him. I hadn't even noticed I was frozen in place, just staring at the man. Nothing but sheer terror flowing through my veins. After he tugged my arm, and I snapped back to reality, I just turned my body and booked it. I didn't even look back to see if the thing was following us or how far back Nathan was from me. I just ran as fast as my body would let me, and ran right past the entrance to Nathan's apartment. Nathan had noticed I run past his place and just started screaming at me in the loudest, shrilling voice I didn't even think he could produce from his body. Almost 6 feet, 15-year-old boy. I didn't stop to listen to him. The only thing I could think of doing was running. Like only my legs had control, and there wasn't any way in hell I was stopping. Just remember shouting back, "No!" and continued to run for my life. He eventually caught up to me and had to tackle me to the ground 4 blocks away from his apartment. He didn't know if we were being followed, but he did hear footsteps following us when we booked it out of the park, so we had to hurry and book back up the street to his apartment. We got back to his place, bolted and chained the door, shut the blinds and made sure all the lights were off, and just listened. We sat in complete silence for about 10 minutes before we heard steps and a weird flooding sound coming from outside the window we were sitting under in the dark. like the sound of a moth hitting the inside of a lampshade. Nathan got up onto his knees and peeked out the front window. His face went completely white, and he just slunk back down. I didn't have to ask. I knew the thing from the park was out there. I wanted to see it for myself again, so I scooted past him and peeked out of the blinds. The thing was just standing there. The sound we were hearing was coming from the thing in the front yard, his head moving back and forth unbelievably and unnaturally fast. I hit the blinds when I brought my hand up to my mouth in shock, and his head just snapped in my direction. We locked eyes, and he aggressively started walking towards the window, total insanity painted across his face. I ducked down and informed Nathan he was coming to the window, and quick. I didn't know what to do. I was so scared. I started sobbing and hyperventilating. Nathan was just as terrified as I was, but he always made sure to make me feel safe and to take care of me in a way. He put his arm around my neck and pulled my head into his chest. Hugging me, he started to rock gently back and forth as the thing outside started pounding against the door we were now sitting across from. He was hitting it so hard, I'm surprised the glass didn't shatter almost instantly. At some point in time, during the early morning before the sun started to come up, we had fallen asleep during a time, and the thing stopped pounding in the door. We woke up around 1 that afternoon, and Nathan looked out the peephole. There was nothing out there, and kids were playing out there, bikes and scooters outside, so he assumed it was safe to open the door. He slowly opened it and noticed something sitting on the step. He knelt down and picked it up. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like everything was going in slow motion. He shut the door and slowly turned around, showing me what was sitting in the middle of his palm. His lighter he had lent to the tweaker guy earlier that night. Home sweet home, only place you can find demon tweakers. We discussed it and think he was either tweaking out and thought he was possessed, or really was, because that shit was one of the most demonic things I have ever witnessed. I say almost because after my mother died, I lived with my bio dad and grandparents. I got into a really dark place and used to mess around with Ouija boards to try to contact my mom, and oh boy, now that's another story for another time.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.